You're listening to Proven Perspectives, a podcast with John Hawkins, the founder of Leadership Edge. I'm Laura, John's daughter, and in each episode, we'll explore a topic related to life, leadership, or mentoring. Through over 50 years of faith in Christ, John has learned proven life and leadership perspectives that will equip listeners for a lifestyle of leadership in their marriages, families, careers, communities, and churches. Hey, Dad.
Hey, Laura. It's great to see you and hear your voice.
It's great to see you, too. How's your day going?
It's been full. We just got back from this wonderful trip, and it has been gangbusters this week in terms of just work and responsibilities with Leadership Edge. But fortunately, this recording is the last big thing on my list for today, so got about another hour or so work. And then Janet and I are going to walk along the beach for a little bit this afternoon, and then go to one of our favorite Mexican restaurants for dinner. So that'll be fun.
That sounds like a great night. Well, I am sitting on the bed looking at a big pile of laundry, so I think I know what I need to do next. But yeah, we're having a good day around here too. So
yeah. Janet used to tell me, John, anyone can wash the laundry. It's a whole nother thing to fold it.
That's hilarious.
And I was like, yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah. So Dad, why don't you kick us off with our topic for today?
Yeah, well, we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite passages in the whole Bible, and it has been that way for, I don't know, at least 20 years, maybe longer. But it's three sections out of the latter part of Hebrews. It's Hebrews 10:32 to 39, then Hebrews 11, 1 to 2 and verse 6, and then Hebrews 12, 1 to 3. And I'll be reading that in a minute, but the topic for today is the remarkable witness of those who have gone before us. We're going to be talking a little bit about just how helpful it is to have had older Christians around us who strengthen us to believe and to follow God, even when it's tough. But one thing that brought this topic to my mind this week was there's a young man that I've become a friend with. He's in his probably mid-20s and is in a serious relationship and is pretty soon to reach engagement. And so he called this week and he said, is there any way we could talk and just talk about me reaching out to my potential future in-laws and asking their permission to marry their daughter? And I'm like, this sounds like a great call. So yeah, let's do it. So we got on the call one morning, and it was interesting. We talked about it for a little bit. And then he said, well, tell me what it was like when you asked Janet's parents for their permission for you to marry Janet. And I was like, wow, that's so interesting that he would want to know that. So I told him, and then he said, and so what was it like when Adam came to you and asked permission to marry Laura? And so I told him about y'all's story and what that was like when Adam came to me. And it was interesting to me just how interested he was in that. That he wanted, any biblical guidance I had on the topic. He wanted just to talk about it in particular in terms of their situation. But he wanted to know what it had been like for us, like for me and Janet and her parents, and then for you and Adam, and, as y'all were getting engaged. And it just brought to my mind that, generation after generation, whatever generation this young man's in, is it Z or Y or whatever, it still means something to him to hear the stories of the ones who've gone before, and what it was like for them and how did they believe God and how did they follow God. So we're going to be looking at this and looking at this passage, and I hope for our listeners today, there is hopefully a newfound interest in the verses we'll be reading and just how beautifully poignant they are.
Yeah.
But also just the important practice of older Christians encouraging the younger generation forward and telling their stories, but also encouraging them in their stories and where they're at. So, Laura, what I'd like to do is just read the passage out loud, but any questions about any of that before I jump into reading the passage?
No, I don't think so. I'm actually really loving this, I don't know if it's a series that we're doing right now, but kind of some of the final podcast episodes, just going through some of your favorite passages that have just all these layers of meaning. So I'm just, it's both a really powerful and beautiful passage, but also it's just fun to kind of hear you draw out all of your, I guess, life lessons and meanings from it. So yeah, let's get started. I'm excited.
Well, you bet. We'll do the Hebrews 10:32 to 39 first. And
Okay.
in this one, the author is especially going to be talking about he's going to be reminding them of their previous faith and calling them to endure. And the book of Hebrews is a little bit of a mystery book. It's not real clear who these Hebrews were, where they lived, what city they were in. And it's definitely not clear who the author was.
Mm-hmm.
The early church at the time of canonization determined that there was good reason for Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, to be included in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a little less known book.
Mm-hmm.
But evidently these Jewish believers, whatever city they were in, they were going through a real time of hardness, of persecution, of just challenge to believe Jesus and to live out their faith.
Mm-hmm.
And so this section, Hebrews 10:32, is towards the end of the book. And so he's encouraging them amid everything they've endured and everything he's just taught them. He's encouraging them to stand fast. And so it reads, "But remember the former days when after being enlightened," that means after they had come to faith in Christ, "you endured a great conflict of sufferings, partly by being made a public spectacle through reproaches and tribulations, and partly by becoming sharers with those who were so treated. For you showed sympathy to the prisoners and accepted joyfully the seizure of your property, knowing," and this is the reason they endured that you have for yourself a better possession and a lasting one. So their hope that got them through this tough time was the future reward, where they knew that they would be with him. "Therefore, do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward, for you have need of endurance." And you just love that older, strong voice looking in the eyes of these younger people and saying to them, you need to endure. You have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. Again, doing the will of God is being linked with the future promise of the fulfillment of our salvation, of being with God face to face. So it says, "For yet in a very little while, he who is coming," that means Jesus, "will come again and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him." But we are not of those who shrink back to destruction, but we're of those who have faith to the preserving of the soul. And in that passage, as I said, he's encouraging them to steadfastness and to endurance, but he's doing it in an interesting way. A lot of times us older Christians, we come around younger Christians and we either think, well, I just need to tell them all the stories of my life, or I need to just point them to Scripture. And neither of those are necessarily bad options. But what the author of Hebrews does in this section is he really points them to themselves. And he points them to a time in their early days of their faith when they really endured hard stuff. When they were made a public spectacle through reproaches and tribulations, and when they became sharers with those who were so treated, and they sympathized with the prisoners and joyfully accepted the seizure of their property. Can you imagine, somebody comes into your house, takes all your stuff, and you accept it joyfully? And so he's referencing that time of former faithfulness, really in a hard season, to kind of stir that up again, and says, and you did that because you knew you had a better possession and a lasting one. And so then he gets to therefore, so based on that former faithfulness in you, don't throw away your confidence now, for you have need of endurance now. so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what was promised. And again, yet in a very little while, he who is coming will come, and he will not delay, but my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faith to the preserving of the soul. So for me, this first section, this Hebrews 10 section, has just been a great picture of what it looks like to stir up the faith and endurance of someone else, and how this author did that. Again, not by alluding to himself or even mainly alluding to Scripture here, but primarily just reminding them of who they were in the past and what God has called them to today in terms of living that out again. What kind of thoughts does that bring to your mind, or questions?
Well, I have a thought and then I have a question.
Yeah.
So like the thought, like one thing that I thought was really cool in it is and actually this is like it's such an interesting mix of the author really like issuing a sober warning, like telling them to take this really seriously. And like the verse right before you started was, it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, which is like, whoa, but then like you said, it goes from that to, but recall the former days when, and really like calling them to encouragement of like, but you've already been through hard things and like you were faithful in that. And so I was thinking about, and I think this is something that my older friends, and including you in that very much, like can do really well, of when you've walked with God and really lived for a while, you both have a sobriety, like where you can call people to something and it's not really out of like, so let's go, it's not like bravado. It's, man, this really matters because I've seen a lot of things, and just like the sobriety of it, but also just the gentleness that can come with really walking with God and caring for people over a long period of time. And so like how those can go hand in hand in a way that is really encouraging to younger people of like, Dad, I feel like when I come to you and I'm, either discouraged or troubled about something, just like that sense that and I hear what you're saying about like what he primarily does is remind them of who they've been in the past.
Yeah.
But kind of, I feel like the thing that's underlying that I hear here and that you definitely do is a sense of, and I have confidence God's going to help you through it again,
Yes.
Because I think that is like those two things together that older people can call us to, of like, I've seen a lot of things and I'm going to tell you, it is really important how you walk. And I know you can walk through this hard thing because I've seen God help you before and I've seen you choose rightly before. So that was, I guess, but the question I had for just like a really quick one is when you're talking about like that he's primarily pointing them to themselves, and you kind of said this, but I guess like how does that fit with like, well, but are like, I guess, could you just explain that like really quickly again, just how that fits with, but really the hope isn't them, right?
I don't know all that the author here was thinking or trying to accomplish. But, the young man I just mentioned, he, about asking his future in-laws for permission to marry their daughter, he was very interested in what did that look like for you, John? And what did that look like when Adam came to you, John? And that was important because I think that gave him, a picture of this is what it looked like in our situation. But what that young man eventually needs to come to is, what will it look like for him to do this? What will it look like for him to reach out to the in-laws, set up the meeting, plan what he has to say, graciously receive their feedback and all that. And I think that what the author may be doing here is he's trying to help them to see themselves being faithful, that you've been this in the past.
Yeah.
And he doesn't just say, well, you were faithful in the past. He describes what that was like. Like you were being made a public spectacle. You were having reproaches and tribulations.
Yeah.
You were sharing with those who were doing the same. You had sympathy for prisoners. You were joyfully accepting your property being taken.
Mm-hmm.
He very graphically reminds them of, this is what it looked like when you did this earlier. And that same kind of thing, by the grace of God, you need to do now. You need to do it now.
I see. So giving them vision for, and this is what it looks like for you to do it again, instead of like it being theoretical or someone else's life. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Again, someone else's, what it looked like for them is kind of a step down the way.
Yeah.
But eventually they've got to get in their mind, but what will it look like for me to do it?
Yeah. No, that's really good.
And so the author is just saying, man, you've done this before. Remember how horrible that was. And you trusted him. And it's all because you knew you had, a promised reward. And that very thing, it's by the grace of God what you need to do now. And then, the whole, yet in a little while he is coming will come, and he will not delay, but my righteous one shall live by faith. And if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure. But then in verse 39, he includes himself with them and then says, but we are not.
Yeah.
It's not just you are not or I am not, but we are not of those who shrink back. And the people he's writing this to may be feeling like, I feel pretty close to shrinking back right now.
Yeah.
But he's bringing them in with him and saying, no, we're not going to shrink back. That's not what we do. It's an amazingly just poignant picture.
Yeah, it's
of how he stirs up their faith to believe again and to get back up again. And I've definitely had men who have done that in my life. I remember just a really hard time that I was going through kind of in the early years of Leadership Edge and just wondering, what is this supposed to be? And how's it going to work? And who's going to pay for it? And all that. And I remember an older man, as I was just kind of pouring out all that stuff, he just looked me straight in the eye and he said, you're going to get through this. And he said, I just want you to know you're going to get through this. And this man was not like just a positive mental attitude, kind of pump you up kind of guy. He was meaning, as you trust God and over time, you are going to get through this. And that's been decades ago. Yeah. And it still sticks. Yeah. So this first part was about, just a reminder of their previous faith and a call to endurance. But then since all of these passages are about faith, the second one we're going to look at is a clear definition of faith. And it's in Hebrews 11, verses 1 and 2, and then verse 6, where it says, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the men of old gained approval. And then verse 6, and without faith it's impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. So the author here has just challenged them. In this moment, you've got to stand firm and believe and obey. And then he almost kind of takes a step back and says, so let's talk about what we mean by this faith. And he says it's the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So he uses two strong words, assurance and conviction, but then two kind of seemingly indefinite words of things hoped for. Like, maybe they'll happen, maybe they won't. Or things not seen, maybe they'll appear, maybe they won't. And it's such an interesting, in a sense, description of faith, because as we grow to follow God and believe in him, it really does become an assurance. It really does become a conviction. And yet, in this life, it's never more than something hoped for. It's never more than something not seen. And that is such an interesting way to describe faith. Both the definiteness and in some ways the indefiniteness.
Yeah.
And by indefiniteness, I don't mean it may not happen. I certainly believe it will happen.
Mm-hmm.
I think the indefiniteness is, but in this life, it remains largely something we hope for and don't fully receive in this life, and something that we don't see.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of an interesting. I mean, he could have defined faith maybe a number of different ways, but that's such an interesting way of letting you feel that tension of assurance and conviction,
Mm-hmm.
but also hope for and not seeing.
Yeah.
And then he immediately says, for by it the men of old gained approval. And I think perhaps he's especially thinking here of Abraham,
Mm-hmm.
where, it says Abraham believed God and it was counted to him as faith,
Mm-hmm.
that he believed in something he couldn't see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's interesting that he says that that's how he gained approval. And then he kind of explains that a little bit further in verse 6, where he says, and without faith, it's impossible to please God.
Yeah.
For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. And so it's the idea here of no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, no matter how hard you pray, no matter how many good things you do, how many times you read the Bible,
Yeah.
Whatever, if you're not doing it with your trust in God,
Yeah.
which means trust in things that aren't seen, trust in things that are hoped for, then you're not going to please him.
Mm-hmm.
And then he explains what he means there by saying, because he who comes to God must believe that he is. So that's the first thing, believe that God fully exists just as he's described in the Bible, that God exists, and that he rewards those who seek him.
Mm-hmm.
And so living your life in every context of life with a belief that the God of the Bible, just as he's described in the Bible, he is with me right now. And if I seek him right now, he will bless me. That's what faith is. So we go from this great encouragement to stand firm and to stand again, and then into a little bit of an explanation of what is faith and why it's so important. Any thoughts on that section, on those verses, what they're about?
Yeah, I have a thought and a question. Like one thing that was interesting, like with some of the things you had highlighted in the last passage too, was kind of seeing, again, like some similar ways that the more experienced Christian encourages this person forward. So like one you said, like kind of defining the term to make sure like they're understanding like, and faith really has to be, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but basically like with our eyes fixed on God.
Yes.
And then some of those similar, like then throughout this chapter, he kind of gives examples of, and this is what it looked like in this person's life. And this is what it looked like in this person's life. So like examples of that. And then also like that kind of sobering challenge of like, without faith, it's impossible to please him. So how important faith is. And then even like, I one thing I liked when you were talking about chapter 10 was how at the end, he kind of includes himself, like, we're kind of brothers or brothers and sisters in this together. At the very end of it, it says, at the end of 11, it says, and all these, though commended through their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better for us, that apart from us, they should not be made perfect, which made me think of, like what you said of, for every one of us, we're not going to, see how it all works out here on earth, but just kind of that thing of like, it's all of us together like this, like witnesses together.
Absolutely.
I don't know. So all of those things are really like encouraging and stirring. But then the question that I had for you was, again, in verse 6, it like emphasizes the reward. And I guess I know you talked about that a little bit in chapter 10. Like if it wasn't the Bible, I would almost think that was a wrong motive for living by faith. So like, I guess, why is that such an important thing that God wants us to understand?
Yeah. Well, I think that with this one, he who comes to God must believe that he is and that he's a rewarder of those who seek him. I think it's kind of a dual meaning of he rewards them in this life by giving them what they need, as they seek him in faith. And that kind of, correlates to James 1, where it talks about if anybody needs wisdom, they should ask, but he must ask in faith, believing that he will receive it. So he rewards us in this life as we seek him in particular moments of the day, and he gives us, in his time and his way, exactly what we need for that moment. But then he rewards us in heaven, and I don't know that I fully have my mind around what reward in heaven will look like. But it seems like it will be something that will be both deeply meaningful to us, but something that I think most likely that will then lay at his feet. That it's not about how much stuff I get to have in heaven.
Yeah.
But it's a reward for a life of faithfulness that then is laid at the feet of God. And so if that's true, then that, in a sense, makes it more than just, well, I'm doing this because I'm wanting to build up all this indulgence for me in heaven.
Yeah.
But it's more, God's the one who determines rewards. That's his business. But I want to live faithful now, and whatever rewards I have, I want to be able to lift them up to him when I'm with him. Yeah. Does that help at all?
No, that's great. I've been wondering that for a while, so I'm glad I got to ask you.
Yeah. So then let's go to this last section real quick. It's Hebrews 12, verses 1 through 3. And so this is after Hebrews 10, after Hebrews 11, and that great section that you referenced, kind of the hall of faith and all these men and women of faith that are called out. And so he starts chapter 12 with verse 1. He says, therefore. It's basically because of everything I've said in this whole book, but especially the things I've said in Hebrews 10 and Hebrews 11, because of the truth of all those things, he's saying, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us. And what he means is those who have gone before, the men and women of faith who have gone before us. And somehow there is some scene where they are surrounding us. It's like an arena, and we're on the field, and they're in the stands, and they're cheering for us. And with this whole cloud of witnesses surrounding us, then what should we do? Let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes upon Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and hath sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And it says, for consider him who endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you may not grow weary and lose heart. And so it's this magnificent picture of this arena of men and women of faith who have gone before us. We're on the field, and we're called to lay aside sins and encumbrances and fix our eyes upon Jesus as we run with endurance the race that he has for us now. And then remembering from Jesus' example that he's the author and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, he despised the shame, he sat down at the right hand. And then there's this wonderful last verse, for consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself. And you're like, yeah, why did he do that? Why did he endure such hostility? And the author says, well, one of the reasons is so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. And boy, that's just a powerful way to remind them that, in a sense, the whole ministry of Jesus, one of the whole reasons for it, was so that now as we've come to faith and he's called us to live out our lives in faith, that his example and his spirit will cheer us on along with those who have gone before as we live it out. So I said that our topic today was the remarkable witness of those who have gone before us. And there are great men and women of faith who have gone before us. But we have to remember that chiefly Jesus went before us. And it's his example especially. And you may wonder, what does this look like in everyday life? I was thinking of Mary Byers. We did an episode on Mary in the last year or so. But she was a woman, an African-American woman who worked for my family as I was growing up. And in some ways, you would say she has lived a very hard life. She's now in her 90s and still is alive and well, though getting older. And as I think about Mary, I just think of what a faithful woman she's been. Her life has been so much harder than mine in so many ways that I'll never even understand in this life. And yet all the years, all the decades that I've known Mary, she just consistently has had a simple joy about believing God and living her life out for God. And very boldly speaking about God to others, even me. And I think that for me, that's been a great example. She has been of what this looks like in everyday life.
No, that's cool. Well, and she's an interesting example because I guess because you lived life side by side so much of the time, you saw a lot from her life.
Yes.
But her influence wasn't so much like speaking, probably like, was it speaking like actual like spiritual truth, or was it the like watching her life as someone who had walked with God for a long period of time, or maybe
it was really
mix?
both.
Huh.
She was a maid, a domestic worker in our home, and yet she did not hesitate to call me out. She would call me Johnny instead of John, and she would see me cutting up in ways that I shouldn't be, and she'd say, "Now, Johnny, God's called you to more than that. You know that." And when she said that, there was no arguing. It was just, and I think the authority she had was just her life.
Yeah.
Like, how did you argue with such a consistently lived life? She is quite remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really good, Dad. Well, I feel like I know we're kind of moving towards the end of this. I think like I feel like there's a few takeaways. One is just, it makes me want to go back and spend some more time looking through those chapters because they are just like so rich. And then also just the encouragement as, I guess I'm kind of in the middle, but I'm definitely, I feel like buying up the opportunities that I have to learn from older, more experienced, wiser people. So those were a couple of the insights that I have. Do you have any final thoughts for us as we wrap up?
Well, I think to our listeners, we just hope, both in my own life, but also in Leadership Edge, that the influence that you have in people's lives, you may not really be that aware of, but there are always people looking to you, and they're looking to you in terms of what example you're going to provide for them, but also they're looking to you as to what kind of encouragement you can provide to them to continue on, even when it's really hard. And so we really hope that you've been encouraged by the passage, as I have been through the years, but that you'll use this as a way to really think about how you can be this kind of person in the life of someone else. And always encourage you to go to our website, lead-edge.com, and you'll find all kinds of resources there in terms of how to have Christian influence in every sphere of your life. So, Laura, that's all. I'll give it back to you.
Great, Dad. Thanks so much. And thanks, listeners, for joining us.
Listeners, if you would like more perspectives on life, leadership, and mentoring, please go to the Leadership Edge website at lead-edge.com. Or if you have questions or ideas about future podcasts, please reach out to us at lei@lead-edge.com. We look forward to hearing from you.